Jeremiah Johnson was made for $3.1 million and earned over $44 million. It turned Robert Redford into a legend. But there was a scene the studio spent $250,000 filming that nobody has ever seen. It was fully shot, fully scored, and fully edited. Then Sidney Pollack cut it. Warner Brothers lost their minds. One executive screamed at him over the phone, but Pollack refused to put it back. What was in that scene that scared the studio so much he paid a fortune for it? And what scared the director so much he threw it away? As of 2026, Jeremiah Johnson is experiencing a major revival. The film is streaming on Max and Criterion Channel, and a 4K restoration was announced for its 55th anniversary. But the biggest news? A collector in Montana recently claimed to have found a dusty work print containing the lost cavalry sequence. Warner Brothers has neither confirmed nor denied its authenticity. The mystery has never been deeper. The bargain that built a legend. Jeremiah Johnson began as a bargain. Nobody at Warner Brothers seemed to fully understand. In 1970, the studio bought John Milius's first draft for only $5,000 small, even then about $5,000 small, even then about $41,000 today. They got a script that would later create a huge hit for almost nothing. Milius was an unknown USC graduate, and the story he wrote was loosely inspired by Crow Killer, the real legend of liver-eating Johnson, the mountain man who was said to have eaten the livers of Crow warriors after the Blackfeet killed his family in 1847. That wild legend became the spark for a film that would earn $44.7 million on a $3.1 million budget, then pull in another $25 million through reissues by 1975. It finished as the fifth biggest film of 1972. What looked like a cheap purchase turned into one of the smartest deals the studio ever made. What made that first draft matter was that Milius understood the frontier from the inside. He trapped, hunted, and lived close to that rough world. The script had a raw, lived-in voice shaped by Carl Sandburg's poetry, hard, sudden, hitting like a hammer. Milius loved language that landed fast and clean, the kind of line that feels like cold air in your lungs. That is also why the studio kept running into trouble. They wanted to improve the script, but every attempt made it worse. Warner Brothers brought in other writers, including Edward Anhalt and David Raphael. On paper, that seemed sensible. In reality, it turned into a mess. Each rewrite drifted away from the rough mountain man tone. The dialogue lost its bite. That is why Milius kept getting pulled back in. Again and again, the studio returned to the writer. It had undervalued because nobody else could match his strange, hard poetry. Even a line like Hatchet Jack's will carried that flavor. "I, Hatchet Jack, do leaveth my bear rifle to whatever finds it." That could sound ridiculous in the wrong hands, but with Milius, it felt natural inside the film's world. By the end, Milius had earned around $80,000 to $90,000. Still, the whole thing embarrassed the studio. They had treated him like a cheap young writer, then spent months proving they could not do without him. And all of this happened while the film was preparing for production in Utah, where Redford and Pollack would soon face snow, budget pressure, and brutal conditions. At the heart of that script was a morality Milius never backed away from. He did not believe violence should come cheap. He believed it always demanded a price. Jeremiah Johnson shows that clearly. Johnson becomes involved in violence after passing through sacred Crow ground. His family is killed. He kills in return. The revenge grows, but it never gives him peace. This was not a Western where the hero cuts through enemies and rides away clean. It was a story where every step deeper into blood pushes a man further from home, from safety, and finally from himself. That made the film difficult for the studio to embrace, because the hero was not heroic in the easy Hollywood sense. Johnson is a former Mexican-American war veteran, but the film does not celebrate him as a simple frontier champion. Instead, it shows what happens when a man walks into a harsh land carrying old damage, then adds new damage on top of it. The two movies fighting inside one film. Jeremiah Johnson was really caught between two different movies. One version came from Crow Killer, a savage revenge story, the legend of Johnson's liver-eating rampage after his family's murder. The other came from Vardis Fisher's Mountain Man, which leaned towards survival, endurance, and the strange rhythms of wilderness life. Milius's early draft pushed harder toward the macho myth. Other writers added inner conflict and psychology. The script kept swinging between a revenge western and a meditative survival film. That tug-of-war never fully disappeared. But maybe that is exactly why the finished movie feels so unusual. It is not built like a straight line. It moves by mood, by weather, by quiet stretches, by sudden violence, by the daily rhythm of trapper life. It has wolf fights, forced marriage through tribal custom, long stretches of silence. Critics later noticed that Pollock softened Milius's harshest instincts. He pulled back from blood-soaked revenge and leaned into sorrow, distance, and emotional erosion. Instead of a pure revenge picture, the final film became something stranger and deeper. It let the violence stay, but made it feel heavy. It let the legend grow, but kept showing what that legend was doing to the man inside it. The stars that almost were. Long before the film reached that form, the project had changed hands several times. In the mid-1960s, executives first imagined Jeremiah Johnson as a vehicle for Lee Marvin. That rough face, worn-down toughness, a man who had already been through the worst. But Marvin never fully lined up with the role. Then, the studio looked at Clint Eastwood. Around 1969 to 1970, Warner Brothers wanted the film darker and more violent, and they also wanted Sam Peckinpah to direct. That combination sounds explosive even now. But once those two strong forces started pulling in different directions, the whole thing stalled. Peckinpah wanted something more raw, more brutal, more morally grim. Eastwood was thinking more carefully about his image and did not want the film pushed too far into ugly extremes. They could not get on the same page. Peckinpah walked away. Eastwood moved on to Dirty Harry, December 1971, and suddenly two future classics split apart from the same broken road. Redford himself came to the role with unusual clarity. When he first read Milius's script, he did not demand rewrites or special control. He simply said, "Yes, that matters." By 1971, he was already big enough to ask for plenty. But what pulled him in was the idea of a man trying to rebuild himself in silence, only to be hollowed out by loss and the wilderness. Redford had begun moving away from simpler action-driven roles, and Jeremiah Johnson gave him a part that let him say more by doing less. The shoot that almost killed the film. Then came the shoot, and that was its own battle. In early 1971, the crew filmed in Utah's Wasatch Mountains at high elevation, where the cold was a daily force pressing against everything. At night, temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds reached 50 miles per hour. Cameras were buried in snowdrifts overnight. 17 days were lost to weather delays. Art director Ted Howarth had already driven 26,000 miles scouting over 100 locations, including Mount Timpanogos and the Uinta National Forest. Even then, the mountain gave no mercy. 7 crew members suffered frostbite. One grip eventually lost fingertips to gangrene. Budget overruns kept climbing. On May 15, 1971, Pollock mortgaged his own house to help keep the film alive. In a chilling echo of history, the 2025 Utah wildfire season burned part of the Mount Timpanogos area, threatening the original filming locations. Preservationists scrambled to document the terrain before it was lost. Just moving equipment became a struggle. Snowmobiles had to haul gear 5 miles every day. Pristine snow created another strange problem. Once a take was done, footprints remained. If a shot got ruined, resetting was not always possible. The mountains were shaping the movie in real time. There was one devastating scene that became central to the film's emotional power. When Johnson discovers the bodies of his family, Pollock filmed it in a single take with almost no preparation. Redford entered the cabin and saw the horrifying setup for the first time. He froze. He stared. He muttered a broken, "No, that was not planned." The shock feels real because a lot of it was real. That scene stayed in the film and became its emotional peak. Editing began in April 1971, and stretched for 7.5 months. Pollock and editor Thomas Stanford had to sort through 120 hours of footage. They cut subplots, especially a cavalry section that pulled focus from Johnson's isolation. They leaned into quiet. They resisted pressure for more explanation. Even the score was built to serve mood rather than force emotion. The lost scene that started a war. One of the wildest things about Jeremiah Johnson is that it once had a fully shot cavalry scene that never made it into the final film. The sequence ran for about 5.5 minutes. It was not some half-finished idea. It had been filmed, edited, and scored. In that lost version, Jeremiah Johnson comes across a U.S. Army cavalry unit in the Rocky Mountains around 1850. There are about 20 horses, 15 extras, and a lieutenant leading the group. Then the pressure begins. They want Johnson to scout for them. They offer him $10 a day, 3 times what a miner could make. But Johnson does not bend. He grips his Hawken rifle and refuses. By that point in the story, he is already a man changed by the mountains. Redford plays him like someone who has gone too far into isolation to ever be pulled back easily. That is what made the scene tense. It was not built on gunfire. It was built on pressure, silence, and threat. The soldiers ready their rifles. One calls Johnson a traitor to his country. Sabers come out. Sunlight hits the steel. And there he is, one man standing against 15 armed soldiers who represent the very world he ran from. No one fires. Nothing explodes. Still, the danger hangs there. Warner Brothers spent about $250,000 on the sequence, roughly $10.50 a day each. The costumes took 3 weeks to sew. John Rubinstein even recorded a tense banjo score for it on March 15, 1972. This was not a small piece. It was expensive, polished, and ready. And yet, Pollock cut it anyway. Why the scene had to go? That decision came after test screenings in Denver on November 10, 1972. The response made something very clear. With the cavalry scene in place, the movie shifted in the audience's mind. What had felt like a quiet, personal survival story suddenly started to feel like a direct anti-military statement. Half the crowd at one screening included Vietnam veterans, and many pushed back. Some called it anti-American propaganda. Others said the emotional thread got lost. Instead of thinking about Johnson's pain, they got stuck on the cavalry and what it meant. Pollock saw the problem right away. He later said he chose intimacy over indictment, and that choice changed the film's legacy. The studio did not take that cut well. They had spent heavily on the sequence. Production had run from June 14 to October 3, 1971, across 98 Utah locations. Crew members hauled camera equipment by mule over mountain trails. The cavalry extras trained for 5 days in formation work at Fort Bridger. The horses were shipped from Wyoming. The wool jackets were custom-made, the brass buttons polished by hand. Post-production added even more cost by early November. About $80,000 had gone into post on that sequence alone. When Pollock cut it, Warner Brothers saw money being burned. Ted Ashley reportedly exploded over the phone, angry that a big action moment had been thrown away. Still, Pollock held his ground, and Redford backed him. Redford believed the scene made the army violence too obvious and heavy-handed. Pollock felt it broke the spell of the movie. Had the cavalry sequence stayed in, the film would have directly shown the army hunting native people and pushing Johnson into that conflict. It would have made the political message much louder. With it removed, the film keeps a distance, exactly why critics later described it as haunting rather than preachy. The legacy of a lost scene. Today, the lost cavalry scene has taken on legendary status. In early 2026, a Montana film collector named Dale Burkholm claimed to have found a 16mm workprint in a storage unit that includes 5 minutes of the missing sequence. The footage is badly faded, but reportedly shows Redford in full costume facing the cavalry line. Issued a statement saying they are aware of the claim, but have not verified the print's authenticity. Film historians are divided. Some believe it is the real thing. Others suspect a hoax. Meanwhile, Jeremiah Johnson continues to find new audiences. The film has seen a 200% streaming increase on Max following the 2025 wildfires that threatened its filming locations. A new generation is discovering its quiet power, and the mystery of the cavalry scene, fully shot, fully scored, fully cut, remains one of Hollywood's most intriguing what-ifs. Pollock won the battle, but lost the war in one sense. He mortgaged his house for the movie he believed in. He cut a $250,000 scene because it betrayed his vision. And he was right. Jeremiah Johnson endures not, despite its silence, but because of it. The film never tells you exactly what to think. It lets the violence be strange, sad, and hard to pin down. And in that distance, between what was filmed and what was shown, a legend was born. Subscribe to keep uncovering the truth behind Hollywood's lost legends. Thanks for watching.